Welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. It's not exactly New Year's, but we're going to do kind of an end of the year wrap up. That's basically going to conclude that all of the issues as to why we said California's got to get out of America years ago, when we started about 2014, all of them are still relevant. I'm going to show you how the parts of information that informed the book California's Next Century 2.0 that created the Calexit movement, written in 2012, and some of the facts that were in the area when we started creating Yes California and Calexit around 2014, 2015 are still here. They just keep being reprinted. So I'm going to talk about how issues we identified years ago were recently brought up again in the last 2 weeks. So the same stuff we were talking about in 2012, 2014, they are still talking about in the year 2022. I'll show you so you can see that the issues related to why California needs to secede have never gotten better, have never gone away, and have never been fixed. I'll walk you through everything and the sources like we always do, and you can make up your own mind. See you soon. Well, the first thing I wanted to point out was this is the review of all of the original arguments for Calexit and how they're still relevant. What I'm going to show you today is new evidence of California's not like America at all, even more evidence proving that. The federal government and Americans, all Americans, not just conservatives, all Americans outside of California, don't really support California values. Yes, that includes your New York liberals. California gets screwed just being part of America. And finally, the last point is California already acts like a nation. We had pointed all these out years ago and when we started the movement, and they're still just as relevant today. I'll walk you through everything. Let's start with California's not like America. So do share screen. Here you go. So the first thing I want to point it out is that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service has a 83-year partnership with the states and individual and industry firearms companies who help with open ranges for target shooting. So there's a 623 open shooting target ranges provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so that people can practice shooting guns and getting good with their guns and ammunition, or bows and arrows. So let's take a look at this map here. Here's the map. What you'll see is there's basically no ranges provided by the United States Federal Wildlife Service in California. So if you look at California, you'll see 2 red dots just above the SA in San Francisco. That's it. And given our gigantic population, I think that says something. So if you travel over to Texas and the entire right side or the eastern half of America, you can see it's crawling with shooting ranges. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Michigan has a ton, Minnesota, Ohio, I think that's West Virginia, all throughout the South, all throughout the entire coast. So there are liberals along the coast and in the Chicago area. But if we look at the Chicago area, it has a lot of shooting ranges. If we look at the New York area, it has a lot of shooting ranges. The Boston area, a lot of shooting ranges. New Jersey, a lot of shooting ranges. Florida, a lot of shooting ranges. So these are where liberals live in New York and Boston, and they are crawling with shooting ranges in comparison to the population. When we look over to California, given that we're 13% of the population, there's a total dearth of shooting ranges. So let me show you. Here you go. Population density map, America. Let's take a look at this. So as you can see, California is a gigantic population on the left. Most of the American population starts about middle of the country and goes all the way to the East Coast. So remember that. Most of the population starts about the middle of Texas, goes straight up through the middle of America to the East Coast. That's where the majority of Americans are. Now let's take a look at that shooting range map again. Where 90% of Americans are, it's crawling with shooting ranges, and yet California at 13% has 2. Basically, it doesn't fit with America. So where the majority of the American population is, it is crawling with shooting ranges. Remember, take from the middle of Texas, go straight up across the middle of America, and look at the entire right side. Tons of shooting ranges. Look at California, 2. That does not match our size of the population, which is proof of how we're different. That's not all. So recently, there was a Filipino-American chess grandmaster, Wesley So, who said it feels like California is a different country. 3-time U.S. chess champion Wesley So talks to some people on the Meltwater Champion Chess Tour finals in San Francisco and said that he's from the Midwest and California feels like a separate country. So this is a guy originally came from the Philippines. He lives in the Midwest. He's only in California for this chess champion. And he himself, this is a guy who's lived in the middle of America, has lived outside of America, says California is not like the rest of America. I live in the Midwest, been here 3-4 times. I don't really know. It feels like California is a totally different country to me. This guy said this recently. Again, somebody from outside of America, lives in America, visited California, knows what other countries look like, said this place looks like a foreign country. And here's just another thing of the U.S. Federal Wildlife Service, a federal agency, does not relate to us the way that it does where 90% of the American population lives. Okay. But here's our second point, that the federal government, all of them still don't support California values. Let me show you that. And this is part of our continuing Trump and Biden, just another shade of each other. So the Biden administration is working to fix more of the Trump border wall. Now, originally, when Trump was president, they said the border wall was racist. Joseph Biden said it himself. The Democratic Party said it himself. Then he says, well, I'm going to patch up holes in the border wall. Then I'm going to fix a little bit more of the Trump border wall. Then I'm going to fix up even more. So Biden originally started with, this is horrible. Then he said, I'll just patch it up. Then he said, I'll fix it a little bit more. Then he said, recently again, I'll fix it up even more. So here's the most racist thing that Trump did, according to Californians, the racist border wall, and Joseph Biden has been backing it up left and right. Secondly, don't forget that Biden still has Latino kids in cages. Those were the 2 most racist things that Trump epitomized to Californians. The border wall and Latin kids in cages. Guess what Joseph Biden did? Both of them. So your quintessential California values are not held up by Democrats. That's not Trump. That's not the Republicans. That's the California Democrat. That's the Democrats with Kamala Harris from California and Nancy Pelosi from California and Joseph Biden, who was the decent America, saying Latin kids in cages, cool, just like Trump, finishing the border wall just like Trump, totally cool. We were told this is the most racist thing ever in California. And then the Democrats do the same thing as the Trump. What's the difference? It's never would happen in California, but it can, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Let's move on to the third point. California gets screwed just being part of America. So we've talked about how California is a donor state, and so it doesn't get back the financial services that it pays in federal income taxes. But one of the other things that we found important is, and we've highlighted, is that California is the dumping ground for America. So we've done this famously. I remember there was a show on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they had a grandparent who was indigent and going crazy. And instead of spending the money to put him in a home, which was expensive, what they did was gave him a one-way ticket to California. Because it happened so much, they made an entire comedy show about it. Nevada, Hawaii, and other states were caught shipping homeless to California. Other states in the South have been doing this. This is well documented. And many shows have made jokes about how they just ship, their drug addict relative, a grandparent who can't make it, somebody who's kind of can't hold a job. They just ship in California. Recently, Gavin Newsom claimed that the U.S. government is sending more and more migrants to California because the state is taking care of folks. The more we do, the more the burden is placed on us, he said. So besides homelessness, the American government is now dumping undocumented immigrants in California. So we already take care of our undocumented immigrants here better than anyone else. That's not good enough. America's got to dump all of the undocumented immigrants on us. We already have about half the population, and they're dumping even more here because we will take care of them. So liberals in Martha's Vineyard, the District of New York, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lives, those liberals can't deal with undocumented immigrants. We saw how, although they're liberals, they ship them out right away. The mayors of Chicago, the mayors of New York were saying this was politicized. This is not fair. Where do you think they'll send those people? To California. Once again, those are liberals. AOC is a liberal. No undocumented Mexicans in my neighborhood. Get them the hell out. Martha's Vineyard is the stomping grounds for Barack Obama. No undocumented immigrants here. Get them the hell out. So Newsom was pointing out how America, including Democrats, dump undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens on us more than we can handle. And they're saying, well, you encourage this. We have no control of the border. So California can encourage undocumented immigrants as much as it wants. It can't let any across the border. That's all the feds. So this is the feds dumping undocumented immigrants on us because we take care of them. We already have half the problem, and they're putting even more on us. But that's not where it is. This is the issue we brought up for a long time. And Newsom also talked about this, I think, about a month ago. The vast majority of the homeless in California are dumped on us from other states. Newsom brought this up. The massive majority of San Francisco homeless people also come in from, and we know this from Texas, just an interesting fact. Now, he was roundly criticized by that, but he was right. What they would not bring up in the newspapers that criticized Newsom for saying this is that they have caught people in Texas, Hawaii, and Nevada shipping homeless to us. Well documented. They have talked about how people were shipping homeless into San Francisco in the 1990s. That was well documented. There's also multiple comedy shows where basically it's an American cultural thing to ship homeless to California rather than take care of it yourself. So that's two types of dumping grounds California is. I'm half Mexican. I have many friends who are homeless. My grandfather here is illegally. I'm very sensitive, but that's not the point. We're taking care of our population, and then America says, take all of the problems off our hand. It's called externalizing when a company does it. If the company has something they need to pay for, they try to get rid of it so they're not spending money. This is basically what America is. We're the dumping ground for America, for undocumented and homeless. And if we got a commensurate support, that would be okay, but we don't. And this is the other thing no one brought up when they criticized Newsom for making this statement. Here you go. The Federal McKinney-Vento Assistant Program, funded by the state LEA, 2011 to 2014, California was given 3% of all money. The McKinney-Vento Federal Assistance Program is the official federal government assistance program for homelessness. Homelessness is not new. It's existed for what? The last 10,000 years? They've had it since the first in 1776. This is not a new idea. McKinney-Vento were two senators or congresspeople who put this together. Between 2011 and 2014, when we had about a third of the homeless population, we got 3% of the grants. 1/3 of the population, 3% of the money. 1/3 of the population, 3% of the money. Doesn't stop there. Federal National Housing Trust Fund 2018 allocations, which gives money to states to fund homes. California was given 13% of the money, although it had half the problem. Half the homeless, 13% of the money. See a pattern here? 2011, 2012. California schools identified 21% of the homeless students nationwide and yet only received 11% of available McKinney-Vento federal funds. Not brought up by anyone when they criticized Newsom for saying, "How dare you say homeless are dumped in California?" We won't mention any of these facts about how that's been documented before and how the federal government gives you a fraction of the amount of money you should have. Here's another literal quote. Approximately 1/3 of the chronic homeless are in California alone. However, the nation's permanent supportive housing inventory is distributed fairly evenly across the United States, which means even though we have a third or half of the homelessness, we only get about 1/50th of the allotment because they want to distribute the housing fairly across all the states, even though homelessness is not distributed fairly across the states. That's why California has a third or a half, depending on what you're looking at, and we'll get 11%, maybe 3% of the money we should get. Not brought up when they needed to criticize Newsom for how dare you say people from outside. And of course, no discussion about how Nevada and Hawaii has been caught doing this in Texas, and no discussion of the episode from the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Just, he's wrong. California just makes people homeless. America doesn't dump their people on them and then not give them commensurate support, which they're completely entitled to according to formulas built into the federal law. None of that's mentioned. Let me show you. Newsom says California about to break amid flood of illegal immigrants. I say undocumented immigrants. The U.S. government must take responsibility and ownership. This is the article where Newsom says, they're dumping their undocumented immigrants on us. And that means the Biden administration, December 15th, he said this recently. See, Biden administration, so that's Newsom saying you're just dumping all your problems on us right there. Here's the other thing where the vast majority of San Francisco homeless people also come from Texas, and they go, "Oh, how dare you say that?" But I just pointed out a lot of stats they didn't cover. Like this one. This is not surprising. California has failed to receive federal support for the problem in proportional fashion. We got 11% of the funds, even though we had 21% of the problem. That was years ago. Well documented. They already knew. This is well documented. Nobody's going to talk about it. And then also a couple other things they didn't mention. So they did a homeless count in San Francisco in 2009. 15.8% of the people there outright said they were out, not from California at all. Los Angeles did a homeless count in 2018, 13%. Now, those numbers were not mentioned at all in any of the criticism of Newsom. Hey, we know for a fact that over around 15% of the homelessness in LA and San Francisco are not Californians. That's the ones who outright claim it. We're not even counting the ones who claim that they're Californian, but they came here on drugs or without a job and basically expecting a handout. And I am all for taking care of our people. What I'm not for is somebody who's not one of us shows up here in need and says, "Help me out." Did you ever pay into our system? Did you grow up here? Do you even care about us? Or are you just here for the money? That's not love. And so sometimes they take people who got here during the recession of 2008 to 2014, and they've lived here for 2 years, and then they go, "This person's a Californian because they've been here for 2 years." They never held a job. They never had any money when they came here. They came here homeless, stayed homeless. And then at some point we call them Californians when actually they're Americans who came here because nobody in America would take care of them. That's the other part of those numbers. That's on top of the 15.8% for San Francisco and on top of the 13% for Los Angeles. So they won't mention any of these things. California is a dumping ground for homelessness and for undocumented immigrants, and we never get our fair share of federal money. And that's on top of being a donor state. So we already pay more into the federal system than we get, and we don't get our fair share of homeless housing. It's just a crappy deal for us all the way around. The other thing we like to talk about was that California already acts like a nation. So let me show you that. Recently, California is still traveling around the world, and our current governor and our former governor are acting like presidents and prime ministers traveling around the world. Let's take a look at that. California China Institute. This is the Berkeley California China Institute Climate Institute, California-China Climate Institute pushes for further U.S.-China climate collaboration and dialogue at UN Climate Change Conference. World leaders convened the past 2 weeks, United Nations Climate Change Conference. Our message has been direct. We must work together, said Mary Nichols. Mary Nichols is the former air quality director here in California. Washington Post, in an interview, Governor Jerry Brown said we need deeper cooperation between the world's two biggest greenhouse emitters. My one big perspective is that climate has to occupy a much bigger place, said Governor Brown, who also urged both Presidents Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping to find common ground. They need to talk about how China can coexist with America. Both are going to have to change to make room enough for the other being on the same planet. So here is our former air quality director and our former governor going to the UN and telling America, you're screwing up by not working closer with China. Right now, all you're hearing about from Joe Biden and everybody is China's a competitor, China's a competitor, China's an enemy. Here's a former governor of California going to the UN and saying, you need to knock that attitude off. You got it dead wrong, America, and you need to work directly with China. And they're saying it's standing next to China in front of the whole world. That's definitely acting like a nation, going to the UN and calling America out on one of its major policies. Just did it. You didn't even hear about it because we do it all the time, so it's not a big controversy. And then here we go. Will California keep up its climate momentum? From Cal Matters, December 12th, 2022. Here we go. This week, state lawmakers, senior officials in Gavin Newsom's administration, and prominent environmental leaders are representing California at the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal, Canada, another UN conference. That's because California is the first and only U.S. state to be an official observer at the convention, and it could help fill a leadership void at the federal level. California is the only state in all of America to be at the convention as an observer, and it could fill a leadership void by the federal government of America on the UN. What do they mean? Well, all of these governments came together with an agreement on goals and UN framework for biological protection. The U.S. Senate has not ratified that agreement. The U.S. isn't leading, but California, as the fourth largest economy in the world, is. So California leading on climate change because the federal government has failed to do anything, and the entire world sees that, and we're pointing that out in front of the UN this month. And then the month before, we went to the UN and outright criticized Joe Biden, Democrats, and America and said you have the wrong policy towards China. So when we go to multiple international conferences and we call out the federal government and we stand next to superpowers and say, here's what you're doing, we're definitely acting like a nation. So you just saw 2 different climate change conferences already acting like a nation. And you just saw our governor recently pointed out how we are a dumping ground for undocumented immigrants and homeless. And yes, some of my best friends are homeless. And yes, my grandfather's undocumented. But there's a difference between taking care of your people and other people just coming and freeloading off of you. And I just showed you how even when you have Joseph Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, kids in cages, Trump's border wall, same thing, reckless abandon, nobody criticized them. And those were the 2 most racist things, according to Californians, now done by American Democrats. America doesn't follow your values. And we just showed you when you look at guns. I mean, the U.S. Forest Service helps provide shooting ranges for Americans to practice guns, except basically in California. And commensurate to our population, we look really out of line with the rest of America when you look at a population density. And you already saw with that guy who travels around the world and around America said, wow, California is nothing like the rest of America. So all of the original reasons that we did this, we're not like America. America doesn't support our values. We're screwed being part of America. And we already operate as a nation, are all true. And there have been recent news developments in the last 2 months that make all of these arguments just as relevant as they were in 2012 and 2014. Basically, the reason for needing to Calexit hasn't changed at all And all of the issues are still relevant, which is why we still need to Calexit. These issues haven't been fixed. Nobody's addressed them. There is no way to fix them. That's why they haven't, except leaving. Wanted to point out that the same things we talked about close to a decade ago, completely relevant and unfixed, meaning they're never going to get fixed as long as we're part of the USA. That was it. Hope you enjoyed the show. As always, share information and think for yourself.